Secretary Vilsack, thank you again so much. I don't know if anyone has shared this with you, but you may also have a future as a preacher. That was amazing. That was genuinely amazing and inspiring, and I was tempted to pass the offering basket after that talk. Friends, what we're going to do is that Secretary Vilsack has been generous and said, hey, I want to do some Q&A, have a conversation with your members and activists here. And so a couple of my bread staff are going to walk around to think about any questions that you might have. And maybe to get this started, I'll ask you maybe the first question. Perhaps like us, but at Bread, we were surprised, taken back that SNAP took center stage in the debt ceiling conversations. It was something that we were disappointed in, but now we're hoping that now that that's been settled and a deal has been made, that the Farm Bill conversation can focus on other elements. And I'm curious how you and the administration, the plans to advance nutrition in the Farm Bill. What are your thoughts to that?
Well, when I talked to Chairwoman Stabenow, who's the chair of the Ag Committee that helps write it on the Senate side, I said, Madam Chair, I hope from your perspective that the debt ceiling discussions and negotiations on the budget snapped shut. Snap. Get that snapped shut? Look, you get one bite of the apple, and there was a negotiation. None of us were all that pleased about the circumstances of improving and increasing the work requirement. What's interesting about this is how little folks understand and appreciate who is the beneficiary and who is the recipient and who needs SNAP. I think the picture that many people outside of the folks in this room have is of somebody who's not working and taking advantage of the circumstances and situation and is getting something for nothing. But when you explain to people, wait a minute, let's talk about this. First of all, about 80% of the people receiving SNAP are in one of three categories. There are working moms and dads with children who are working part-time or low-income jobs and receive SNAP as a result. Or there are people who are senior citizens who are living on a fixed income, likely a low Social Security check. They've already worked their entire life. They've already paid their dues, if you will. Or there are people with disabilities and maybe significant disabilities enough that they'd love to work but can't. So that's 80%. So then who are the other 20%? And I pointed this out to the president, and it was interesting because he was obviously listening to me. I said, Mr. President, you realize that a significant percentage of these able-bodied adults without dependents, you realize who they are. And he said, well, tell me. And I said, well, first of all, nearly 50% of them or so are homeless. Homeless. And I said, because you have that high percentage of homelessness, the chances are pretty good that within that universe of people, you got some veterans. You got some veterans. You got some folks who came back from experiences overseas and just have had a hard time getting back acclimated into society. So you really want to punish those people? And to the president's credit, basically what we got in the negotiation was not basically utilizing those work requirements in against folks who are veterans, folks who are homeless, and also folks who are transitioning from foster care. So while we're not happy about the work requirements, I'm pretty happy about the fact that we've got a recognition that applying a work requirement to a homeless veteran didn't seem quite right and isn't right. And so in that sense, the program's has some flexibility. So to your point, the question is simply this. I think we've had a conversation, we've had a debate, decisions were made, and we move on. We don't have that as part of the conversation in the Farm Bill, nor should we. There are many things to talk about in connection with the Farm Bill. Yep. That ought not to be one of them.
Yeah. So tomorrow, as you do your Hill visits, of course, we're going to be asking members of Congress to protect SNAP, but there are other elements in the Farm Bill that are really, really important. And we'll speak about them later today and tomorrow in preparation. This is maybe a question that you sort of engaged, but are there other things that you would encourage Bread for the World members that are here, those that might be watching this video later? Like, how can we continue to be that moral voice? Like, are there any practical suggestions, encouragement for this group of folks?
Well, there's another issue that crops up from time to time. I have the capacity as secretary to tap into, from time to time, the Commodity Credit Corporation. Now, this was set up during the New Deal, during the Depression, and it essentially provides a resource to the Secretary of Agriculture to utilize to create markets or to respond to unique challenges in the nutrition space. During the course of the pandemic, and as we evolved from the pandemic and had supply chain challenges, we've tapped the Commodity Credit Corporation to assist both food banks and also schools to be able to have resources to be able to purchase food, to make it a little bit easier for them to deal with some of the challenges that they face. You know, as good as the SNAP program is, as good as all the nutrition programs are, the reality is they don't completely respond to the need. You all know this. The folks who work at food banks are absolutely incredible folks. They're amazing people, and they are doing such an incredible job. But you know, it's hard for them. It's hard. It was particularly hard after the pandemic. We all felt a need to help, and so donations came in record amounts, and during the course of the pandemic, we were there. And then as things waned from the pandemic, well, you know, the supply of resources and support for those food banks began to decline a little bit, that people began to go back to their regular life. Well, we have to have strong food banks. We just absolutely have to have strong food banks, and they need support. So there are some who would like to restrict the ability to utilize the Commodity Credit Corporation in those kinds of circumstances. Well, for the life of me, I don't understand why. Because again, you know, it strengthens the overall system. So that's one area. I think it's important and necessary for us to look for ways to, from a messaging perspective, I want you to think about this. When you think about all of these nutrition programs, you also want to think about who benefits from them beyond the specific beneficiary. So who benefits from SNAP beyond the SNAP beneficiary? Well, I'll tell you who. If you have a card that allows you to buy at the grocery store more groceries, most people are going to buy more groceries. Well, if they buy more groceries, that means more groceries have to be in the store. So somebody has to shelve and stock those groceries. Well, that's a job. Somebody actually has to truck them to the grocery store. Well, that's a job. Somebody has to package and process them. Well, that's a job. And somebody has to grow and raise whatever is in that can or in that box or in that meat cabinet, and that's income for farmers. So there's an entire supply chain that is economically benefited from this program, in addition to the families that receive assistance. So when you basically say, well, we need to cut SNAP, you're also saying, in essence, we need to reduce farm income. When you say we need to really, you know, ratchet down support for food banks, well, you're also saying maybe those jobs in that supply chain aren't as important as we think they are. And so people need to understand the totality of these programs, right? And then that dollar that gets spent, it revolves around the economy several times. And so it's important to understand the aspects, the numerous angles, if you will, or aspects of a nutrition program, in addition to the obvious, which is that people get fed, people get employed, people get income because of this program, which is also important.
Thank you for helping us connect the dots there. And earlier in your talk about just humanizing, I think this is a real big challenge for us. We're not just talking about a blank number of 41.5 million Americans who are on SNAP. We're talking about sons and daughters, our neighbors, people in our family, people in our pews. I remember many years ago when I was a pastor, I had shared the story early on in our marriage when my wife and we were going through a challenging time and we were on state and federal safety nets. And years later, I shared that story in a sermon, and I was stunned by the number of people in my own church who I had known who emailed or reached out to me and said, "Me too." And I had no idea that this was happening within my own congregation as well. So humanizing it and connecting it to the larger story is so important. So friends, we're going to do some Q&A here. And so if you've got questions, you can raise your hands. There's a couple folks here. Darren, why don't we start with you? Just go ahead and introduce yourself and then your question. That'd be great. Thank you.
Perfect. Mr. Secretary, my name is Sister Sarah Tarango. I'm a sister of St. Joseph of Orange in California. And our goal, everyone in this room, and it sounds like yourself too, and our goal to eliminate hunger, healthy soil is essential. And I'm going to quote J.I. Rodale here, that healthy soil equals healthy food equals healthy people. And one of the pillars of BREAD's asks is sustainability. So my question is, in what ways can the 2023 Farm Bill specifically and positively address the threat to food security posed by the climate crisis? Hoping that there's some soil in that answer.
Okay. Eugene, I went to school at a Catholic grade school for 8 years, and so whenever a sister stands up, I get a little nervous. I know, sister, but it's very deep. But I want to be real serious about this. This is a very important topic for us. And I mentioned that CCC program. We basically identified $3 billion from CCC, and we put it on the table. And we said to farmers, ranchers, to environmental groups, to conservation groups, to universities, to minority-serving institutions, to underserved producers, to major food companies, to retailers, what would you do with this money to advance climate-smart agriculture that would include soil health, water quality, et cetera? We received 1,000 applications asking for over $20 billion of assistance. So we were able to fund 141 of those projects. Every commodity, every state in the union, every sized operation, every method of production is included in this program. We have nearly 100 universities and historic black colleges, minority-serving institutions, helping to monitor, measure, verify, and report the environmental results of greenhouse gas reductions, carbon sequestration, soil health, water efficiency, et cetera, over the next 3 to 5 years. We want to be able to find out what works and what doesn't work. We know that there are some things that work very well. We want to see them expanded. We anticipate over 60,000 farmers will participate in this. Roughly 25 million acres will be dedicated to it. We think it might even be larger than that. And here's what's important to note. We're going to just take a few, I don't know what your schedule is, but
we're good.
This is a very important question. We had a record farm income last year. Best year in the history of the United States of America in farm income. Now, normally when a Secretary of Agriculture can say that, he or she should walk off the stage with great applause. But the reality is there's a serious problem, and that is that we've seen a remarkable consolidation and concentration of that income, to the point that the 7.5% of American farms, roughly 150,000 out of 2.1 million farms, selling more than $500,000 in stuff every year, those 7.5%, those 150,000 farms, got 89% of that income. Now, I was well taught by those nuns back at St. Paul's Cathedral, so I know that that means 92.5% of our farms, nearly 2 million farms, had to share the other 11%, which means that nearly 50% of farms didn't make any money at all. And about 40% made money, but they had to have an off-farm income to be able to keep the farm. And that tears at the fabric of rural places and small towns, right? So we need to do something about that, and I think climate is the answer. As challenging as we are with climate change and the impacts of climate change, there's an opportunity side here. And that opportunity side is to have farmers rewarded in the marketplace for climate smart practices, and then be able to work with other industries and organizations that need offsets and need help to get to net zero, because farms actually have the capacity to get below zero in terms of emissions. And in doing so, soil health gets improved, productivity gets improved, water quality gets improved, the efficiency of water gets utilized more effectively, and particularly in western areas where there's drought, et cetera. So this is a tremendous opportunity for us, and we are making serious investments in this, and we're going to have a very transparent program in the sense that we're going to get these results and this information, we're going to make it available not just to people in the United States, but internationally, because we're working, this is not a competition. This is, we all need to do, I mean, all farming needs to do this, right? So rest assured, we are very, very focused on this issue. And in addition to that, we're taking our normal conservation programs, and we had a soil health workshop last year focusing on soil health. We have a rotational grazing effort this year. And with the Inflation Reduction Act, we now have an historic amount of money available to reinforce what works and to invest much more historic levels in what works. So this is an incredible opportunity if, and this is a big if, those resources are preserved. So when folks want to do more in the Farm Bill, they often say, well, let's cut SNAP. Well, that's snapshot. Well, okay, then let's take some of that money from conservation, take it out of one farmer's pocket and put it in somebody else. We can't let that happen.
Thank you very much. Jamie, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. My name is Pastor Villa. I'm a Lutheran pastor, and I served in Florida as a chaplain for the Immigration Services. And actually, I'm in Omaha, Nebraska, also working with law enforcement and police department. And the question is this: how these programs are reaching the immigrant community, the people as vulnerable, they are struggling with citizen and documentations. And as leaders of faith, how we can do to support your effort in keeping these programs to be available for all.
Well, I appreciate that question. Obviously, the SNAP program has certain restrictions. That's not true of some of the other nutrition programs. The WIC program doesn't necessarily have those kinds of restrictions. So understanding the importance of which programs have the greatest flexibility, which programs are designed to provide the greatest number of folks. But I will tell you this. I'm going to give you Tom Vilsack's answer. This is not necessarily Secretary of Agriculture's answer. It's Tom Vilsack's answer. We are having a conversation in this country about work requirements on SNAP. We're having a conversation which is just hard for me to totally understand about how young it can be to put somebody to work. In my home state, somebody, actually a majority of the legislature, thought it was a good idea to allow 16 and 17-year-olds to serve liquor in restaurants. Initially, they thought it was okay for them to serve it in bars. So why are we having this conversation? Well, I think the reason we're having it is because we have a broken immigration system. And that has impacted and affected the workforce. It certainly has impacted and affected the workforce in agriculture. There is a crying need for people to work on the farm. There was a bill passed in the House last Congress that was bipartisan. That was a bill that was put together by farm groups with the most conservative people and farm worker unions, some of the most progressive people. They got together in a room and they said, we're going to solve this problem for our friends in Congress. We're going to make it easy for them so they don't have to choose between farmers and unions. We're going to come together, say, here's the answer. Just pass it. And the House passed it. They couldn't get 60 votes in the Senate. Now, why is that? Because people want to use this issue for political purposes. They want to divide us over this issue. They want to create the other. I mean, boy, how often do we have to do this in humankind? When are we going to learn, right? There is no other. It's us. And the reality is, until we get this problem solved, until we say to those who are elected, have the courage to do what you know you need to do, which has been done in the history of this country. We've had an immigration system in the past that invited people to this country with the understanding that they were going to do very tough jobs. And they did them. And they did them extraordinarily well. And then they went home to their sons and their daughters. And they said in all sincerity, do not do what I'm doing. Do better. And their kids took that message to heart. And as they did, they became teachers and preachers and doctors and lawyers and engineers and business owners and carpenters and bricklayers, and they created a great life. By failing to address this issue, in my view, we are preventing that great story of America from continuing. And we then create a circumstance and situation where we create artificial barriers, difficulties, criteria, which separates folks. And that's basically what's happening now. So we're going to do what we can with the programs we have to make sure that everyone who is eligible, everyone who is legally entitled to receive that program receives it. We're going to continue to provide resources to food banks that may or may not be all that interested in what your immigration status is. We're going to continue to figure out ways in which we can be in those schools, and it won't make any difference where that youngster came from. They're going to get a breakfast or they're going to get a lunch. And then when people begin to use it as an issue to divide us, we're going to stand up and say, no more. No more. All right?
So, friends, that was Unplugged with Tom Vilsack. So unfortunately, our time has expired. We are still so gracious, Secretary Vilsack, for your time. Friends, would you just join me in showing our appreciation for the Secretary?